Anyway.
May I ask that Sylvia Hayden be moved up on the agenda so that she can speak briefly to the communications charter revision and also to town hall meetings.
Is there a motion to adjust the agenda so that Sylvia doesn't have to sit here through the entire meeting? I move.
There you go.
Second.
Thanks for that.
All in favor? Aye. Aye.
And we'll do that just after member forum, if that's acceptable.
That'll work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. You've all received the agenda. Is there a motion to adopt the agenda? John, thank you. Jane, thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposition? Okay, great. Let's see, Nicole isn't going to be here to provide the report for the resort. Debbie, do you want to tell us about your vacation?
Just that I'll be on vacation after today's board meeting and we'll be back on the 30th.
Our next scheduled meeting will be the 16th through the 21st, or the 16th.
5 days.
Yeah, those will be shorter. At 4 p.m. So Debbie, where are you going for vacation?
I have my son's birthday, I have a wedding anniversary, and I have family visiting from Vegas. So it's a staycation and
Have
fun.
fun.
Thank you very
Sounds
much.
like a great event, great week. Is there a motion to approve the meetings of the July 22nd meeting? Steve, is there a second? Second. Bill, is there any revisions or comments?
Just had one, the motion under the treasury report to have someone sign to move forward with the CIT bank loan application. It just seems a little unclear.
I'm sorry, what is that?
The motion says to have someone sign to move forward with the CIT bank loan application. I just think maybe that should have been more specific.
Should it say Joe or Doug or an approved authority or something like that?
Authority would be fine.
Okay.
Can we make that adjustment, Debbie?
yes.
Okay. Is everybody okay with that? We need to do a motion to accept that change?
To approve as amended.
Yeah,
So moved.
thanks. Second. Bill, second. All in favor?
Aye.
Are there any other adjustments or changes or anything to the minutes? The July 22nd meeting? Okay, all in favor of accepting those minutes? Approving those minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposition? That's unanimous. August 11th, special board meeting minutes. Is there a motion to accept?
Motion to accept.
Steve?
Second.
Thank you, John. Any discussion, any changes, any comments? All in favor? Aye. And no opposition. Okay. Next is member open forum. Lori, do we have anyone that wants to speak?
I have not had anybody indicate that they wish to speak during open forum.
Okay. Anything else that we need to cover in open forum? Okay, we'll move along. Debbie, you want to give us your executive director report?
Can we go ahead and have Sylvia?
Oh, that's right, Sylvia, sorry.
Am I on?
You're on.
Okay,
Is this the communications committee report?
well, Debbie's got that from Patricia. Mine is, the upcoming town hall is so important. I wanted to make sure we have one more town SRA this week to put out, and I wanted to make sure that we had the right wording for it.
Okay.
Because I understand for the September 8th one, we don't want to get that wording out until after the first meeting, right? So I guess what's important is we've talked about strategies and priorities, but not focusing too much on the budget for this first time around? Or, I mean, how does this all kind of go together?
Well, I'll give my 2 cents, and I think we can all pile on that. It seems to me that our budget is focused around priorities and strategies. And the whole point of the town halls is to get the budget in front of people so that they have the ability to understand what it is comprised of, what those priorities are, how they reflect in the budget.
Mhm.
So it's kind of hand in hand in my mind. Joe, do you have a different?
I agree with that.
Is there a budget that will actually, a draft that will be out to the community before that meeting?
I don't believe there's going to be anything out to the community before any meeting.
Because if we emphasize the budget too much, people are going to say, how come, why isn't there anything I can review ahead of time? And we're trying not to get into that tussle.
So the question to me, in my opinion, is going to be people, number one, we don't give them detail. We give them very broad brush things in the AGM. And at any level, I don't want to necessarily provide tons of detail because then they can just pick and nitpick about individual things in the budget, which from my perspective, they don't have feedback in. We should be providing strategies, like something like we're going to do exterior landscaping. We're going to do the gates. We're going to do the parks. We're going to do this, that, and the other thing. The total of that external landscaping is X dollars. Not details about what is going to be here, what is going to be there, because that's granularity that people will spend a ton of time over if they feel like it. This is, in my mind, this is all broad brush types of stuff.
But do we present these kind of themes? I would call them kind of themes or kind of main points that then they would react to and either embellish or revise.
I think the best person to ask that question to is Doug. For any
Doug.
strategies that are there, priorities, we can give them costs associated with that, but
Yeah, I think that it's more of a discussion of here's what this piece of the budget is going to look like. Here's how it's different than what we've done in the past, if there's differences. And here are really the strategies and what our priorities are as it relates to why we're doing it that way. And I think that as we walk through the main budget pieces, we'll pretty much cover everything. So when Joe talks about that broad brush, we can talk about, for example, the maintenance budget. We can talk about what's in that maintenance budget, what's different from what we've done in the past, why we're moving in that direction, and not getting into how much money we're going to spend on new wheelbarrows or new hammers.
No, of course not. But will you do a presentation, a slide presentation?
Yeah, I'm going to put a PowerPoint together.
as an example,
Yeah.
Personnel in the AGM for in the 2021 budget and in the revised budget is somewhere in the vicinity of just over 50% of our total spending.
Right.
It's still in that vicinity.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one that we can largely put to the side with a couple of little comments about, what are we thinking of doing with personnel? I know that there is some maintenance thoughts that are going to happen for 2022, which are different, but from a percentage standpoint, it doesn't change by very much as a percentage of the whole. So that leaves about half the budget to talk about. The building is, more than 100 grand out of the 900. So then that leaves the two main areas, as you guys might remember, are professional fees, which are captured under administration, and external maintenance costs, which is captured under maintenance or repairs and maintenance. One is going up by close to $100,000, and the other is going down by somewhere around 70 or 80,000, I think. So if you want to narrow it down to just a couple of little things, those are the two buckets where there's going to be more chatter about. The rest of the stuff just sort of happens, whether it's, you know, legal fees, accounting fees, various other costs around. So there's only really three big buckets to talk about: personnel, what's happening with personnel, not any individual details.
Right.
Repairs and maintenance, or just call it maintenance costs, external, and then professional fees and what's changed from year to year. The rest of it is, it can be just aggregated as everything else unless there's one or two items of significance. In this package, you will see a roll-up of what's been presented so far. Unless we do something at this meeting to suggest any changes to that roll-up, that's going to be the content of how we comprise the buckets. From my perspective.
Steve?
We're going to discuss the reserve fund.
Absolutely.
Yes.
So that'll be another bucket.
Yes, that's maintenance bucket. And John put that in a very detailed, what he put together is very detailed. That adds up to X amount of money. And it's what, 10 or 2 or 3 categories of items is about all it is. One big 10 gates and a few other things.
What about the reserve fund deficiency and the beginnings of a plan to restore it to something close to reality?
That's a good question, and I don't know how we're going to do that. We haven't had any strategy about that, so I don't want to go off and say anything if we haven't had any strategy about that.
So we need a reserve study. Don't we need a
The
reserve study?
You're talking about the
No, we need a new one,
Yes,
right?
that's
A
true.
real one.
Well, I think that to that point, we've done more long-term planning with Bruce and John this year that I think really puts the reserve study kind of off to the side for a year, because although we update it, what we've done is a lot more in depth and more detail. Helen, you had your hand up?
Thank you, Doug. So that is town hall meeting number 1. What is going to be the difference between that and number 2? And I'm thinking about the package, because the elections committee has to put out the whole ballot package. Will meeting number 2 have the more detailed budget presentation on which members will vote? What's going to be meeting 1 and 2?
I think number 2 will be driven somewhat by number 1, but I think that number 2 is going to reflect the reception that the discussion got from the first meeting and make any changes, and maybe we get a little bit more detail. I don't know. I think that the second one should, though, be reflective of the first one. Steve?
And it really will have the budget, because that's what people want to see. They want to vote.
They should have the budget for the second one.
Paper clips, but they want to know.
I think there's a big problem if we don't come to the community with some increase in the reserve contribution.
Yep.
I mean, it's just out there, right? And we know it's going to have to go up. And it's fine to say we're doing a much more detailed, careful reserve study to find out what that final figure is. But we know we've got to do something. So we're going to bump it up by 12 cents every 6 months, or whatever number we think we can bear. But we know it's got to happen.
So that's a good point. We haven't really focused on.
We have not.
Study.
To me, we haven't focused on the revenue piece or the dues piece until we figure out what the spending piece is. So once we figure out what the spending is, both ops and revenue, then it's easy to say, okay, in order to break even, that's just to break even, we need to have dues of X on the operating and Y on the reserve, just to break even. That has no contribution towards future for reserve. If we choose to want to have a future for reserve funds, then, or increase it, then it would be Y plus whatever percent we think is appropriate.
So to Steve's point, when do we, as a board, have that discussion relative to our town halls?
We probably need to have it today.
Okay.
I know that John, so I put out what I have is the operating fund expenses from the most recent information I've got. John may be touching on, I didn't include, but he may be touching on the reserve fund. I think it was 115,000 or something like that. But we'll get to that at a later time on the reserve side, as opposed to what we charged in the past and what we've raised in the past. We could certainly go through some of that stuff.
So can we discuss that then in the financial reporting section?
Certainly.
Okay, then let's move on with Sylvia's.
Okay, so now that we've got the buckets, I'm still not sure how to verbalize that into a description of how much information. Is it going to be, you're sticking with percentages at this point?
Well, let me ask a question. Why do we have to be so detailed in telling people about what exactly is going to be at the town hall? I've seen signs on the gates that say, come to the town hall. We're going to talk about X, Y, and Z. Why isn't that good enough?
Because Doug has asked me to put something about the budget into it. And this conversation shows how fluid that is. So is the signs and the town hall that's up there now going to be okay for next week, or do you want it changed to reflect?
As a board, we have not had any meaningful discussions about the budget for next year.
Right.
In terms of any particular content, upper, higher, lower, the same, anything like that. So I think it would be premature to say that we're going to talk much about the budget. That's not the intent of this first town hall, is my understanding.
But everything I've heard is that it's driven by the budget.
What's it?
That the two town halls are going to be focused on getting people to understand the budget so that it passes. Everything I've heard about it at these meetings.
So everything I've said at these last couple of meetings have said it is not about the budget, it's about priorities for the community. So you may hear one thing, I've stated something completely
In
different.
order to arrive at the budget.
Exactly.
So why don't we simply say that the major initiatives that will drive the budget will be discussed at the town hall?
Perfect.
Yeah.
I've wanted that all along. We've got budget numbers in behind those initiatives. because they've dropped it out.
And we should be able to quantify.
Yeah, we've got some budget numbers in behind those initiatives.
So it seems to me that, you know, Sylvia, we can, the note that I sent you that said in the context of the budget and stuff, but why don't you kind of write something, send it to us
Okay.
so that we can tune it up a little bit if we feel that it's necessary and get it to a point where it's final.
Okay.
So Doug, I also see that we've changed since whenever it was, December of last year, January this year, I don't remember. But we've changed priorities, right? When we went through and we did our town halls early this year,
In March.
in March, what we're doing today is different. It might be helpful in the town hall that you reflect that, literally almost have a slide. This is what we said then. There were some revisions, there were some changes, the board changed, priorities changed. Here's where we are today.
Yeah, I think that that's a statement on moving our focus to governance, or from governance to maintenance.
Yeah.
And having a long-range forecast budget so that the community can understand where the finances are and where we're going much better prior to the AGM. Ellen?
Thank you, Doug. The board's response, before I get into my other comment, the board's responsibility is governance. Staff do maintenance and committees do maintenance. The board does not, that's been part of the problem, is the board's tried to maintain everything. What I wish to draw your attention to is the packet that goes to the membership to vote on is sent out on the 30th of September. The board meets on the 16th of September. On that date, they must have a budget because it takes staff time to put that packet together to go to the members. I do not recall right now when the second town hall is, But that one should focus on the budget based on the strategies and priorities, of course, because that's how budgets are built. But I think the members are going to expect a more detailed budget at the second town hall. And then the detailed budget, however we describe detail, is up for grabs, is in the packet that is sent out to be voted upon on the 30th of September. So you've got some deadlines. September 16 is the final for getting that done. I think the staff can manage it after between the 16th and the 30th to get it together. Thank you.
That should be very doable.
Yeah, I just want to emphasize that we have to be very focused and we can't get too broad in scope, I think, on the first town hall. We need to keep it focused around strategic priorities and flowing from that budget. And
Yes.
let's not bring in what was done or not done. And I think we really need to focus around that issue. It's too easy to get off tangents.
Great.
And that's the focus. And I agree with Helen's point that the second one, we need to have a budget, even if it's a draft or rough draft, whatever you want to call it, because people need to see something with numbers on it.
I think in our PowerPoint slides, in the deck, we will want to have the various pieces of the budget. Sure. And then at the end of the day, or at the end of the presentation, we should be able to kind of wrap it all together and say, here's what our spending is, here's our anticipated revenue. And then let's talk about revenue. And
Is that the second town hall?
no, I think we covered all in the first one so that we
Yeah.
get feedback, so that at the second one, we can be reflective of what that feedback was.
I'm comfortable.
Okay.
Will communications help with the PowerPoint? Will you help prepare with the PowerPoint, or is that something that you're doing alone, Doug?
Well, I've got the Semiamu template. What I thought I'd do is try and get it put up, and then maybe the communications committee can dress it up a little bit from there.
We need, the big mistake we made at the town halls last year were twofold. One, we had
Yep.
way too many slides. And two,
Yeah.
we had way too many bullet points on each slide. Correct PowerPoint presentations are done with very few bullet points, not the minutia, but the themes, and then few PowerPoints themselves, slides. So let's do a better job on that. And I'd be willing to help with that if I can.
Okay.
Okay, so what I've heard, just make sure we're on the same page, is that we'll stay with the wording that we've been using with strategies and priorities. And then I can add, because I like Steve's wording, these are the major initiatives that will drive the budget. So it would only need that tiny bit more for the town, for SRA this week. And I think it would address everything.
Yeah, write it up and then shoot it out to us. So
I
that we
will,
can-
I will, but that's just to let you know, that's what I've been hearing. I guess the second one is so important. Would you mind if I came to the next board meeting, just so we can make sure that we get everything out?
Absolutely not. You can come to any board meeting and we'll put you on the agenda. John?
What is the date of the second town hall?
Hey,
Doug,
September 8th.
Helen?
the second town hall is before the next board meeting.
Correct. It's on the 8th.
Yep,
Yes. So I think, Sylvia, if you're asking about what to do for the second town hall, that needs to be done maybe with the executive and staff. Because the board meeting isn't until the 16th, and that's drawn from that will be what the official election ballot is, which election committee is responsible for.
Sylvia, anything else on your agenda?
I just want to make sure. Yeah, I will, so I can answer any questions. I guess then, who, after this, the 25th and before the 8th, I'll just connect with you on what you want for.
Yeah, connect with primarily with Joe, John, and me. If there's anything that we need to really tune up, because John's really focused on maintenance, Joe's focused on the finance and kind of the overall picture. And
I would guess since it's Wednesday and a Wednesday, I think are the town halls, if I'm not mistaken, we should probably think about convening on Thursday or Friday and not let it go 5 days
I agree.
to the next week.
Yes.
Okay,
So when you say convene, the three of you are gonna get together to determine.
Probably to chat about what just happened and what do we need to think about.
yeah, and
Okay.
and Sylvia, you may want to participate
Well,
in
that
that
might
so
be
that
the
you can hear
easiest.
it. And yes,
So will you just include me in
Yeah.
that? Okay,
Sure,
and then that way I don't have to ask you again.
Mhm.
Okay?
sure.
I'm
Thank you,
happy to do
Sylvia.
that. Okay,
Thank you.
If I may, both communications and Sylvia can answer any questions on the proposed revised charter.
Okay, that sounds fun.
Patricia was unable to be here today, asked me to make this presentation. So we're looking at Communications Committee revised charter. She wrote, the Communications Committee is presenting its revised charter, which reflects a welcoming structure, maintaining its number one priority, which is to communicate vital information from the SRA to members. And then the committee's in the process of creating a strategic plan, which will be sent to all committees for reviewing and input in order to establish a more consistent and proactive form of communication. It will reflect a clear direction from the board and make sure that all correspondence will have an end result and then plan of action with deliverables. And then and this what Sylvia mentioned, that they're emphasizing the town halls and publications and such. And so if you would refer to the information in your packet, what the Communications Committee has done is taken a 4-page charter and condensed it to what they think are the priorities of the committee into a 1-page document. And Sylvia, would you like to go ahead and if there's anything else that you'd like to say before the board looks at the charter?
I think the main thing for us is we were talking about that the charter was so dense and so legal focused that if you want to present that charter to somebody to say, we'd love to have you be on this committee, you read that charter and you go, hell no. And so our idea was that we kept the first 2 paragraphs exactly the same because that is the official reason why we exist. But then we made the rest of it more user-friendly, but at the same time, there's still that whole idea that we expect everybody to be respectful. So there's not an official code of conduct in there, but there's an expectation of that. So that's what we've done, is to make a committee charter that is user-friendly.
And that's the first one in the packet?
Yeah.
It's the San Diego Resort Association, DBA, let's see, Communication Committee Charter that's
The
there.
bullet points.
Page 43, is that the one?
I think it's page 43.
And the first one, I think, Steve, is the revisions to Finance Committee Charter, then it's communication, and then there's yet another for elections.
I agree. I think that this layout is much easier to navigate and negotiate.
So as a question, is what you did is take 4 pages and can reduce it or condense it into 1 page? And that should be a goal of virtually every committee charter, I think, because that's what we were looking at when we met last week. But we decided, no, there's just too much here to talk about. We'll do this at the next finance committee.
After you get past the
Yeah.
AGM.
Well, I think, I would just like to say that I think, I agree with the comment, less is more is what I always like to say, we don't need all the extra fluff. And it does confuse, but we do have, I think we want to have consistency across the different committees. And format is maybe a small thing, but format and presentation, I think, matter. So what I was going to suggest as a topic of discussion in the governance committee in a future meeting after the AGM is that we review all of we do a project to sort of review and streamline and make consistent across all the committees, these charters. Because I think all of us, in hearing what Joe just said about the finance committee, also has the same opinion. I'm sure some of the other committees have similar, that we could maybe use this as a launching point, as a model, because I don't know where that template came from. I guess it came from the consultants.
The original one?
Well, the ones we've been using.
Yes.
Because when I had the safety and security and it was sent to me, it came from Mitch, and I assumed it was just a template they picked up somewhere.
So it's in this, oh, I'm sorry. It's in this,
You know, the one thing that is in the existing charter template that's not here are deliverables. And that may be actually the most important core of the charter, is what are you supposed to be doing and how and you're accountable to the board for doing that. So I would suggest that either it's in the charter or we have another set of documents. There's the long-term deliverables and the annual deliverables of the committees, but I don't think we should lose that.
well, the deliverables are in there. I just called them responsibilities instead.
That's called deliverables.
On
8, item 8 deliverables.
Doug, are you on page 43? Page 43 of our handout is the one pager. Are you further down?
Is that what the thought was? It was because I thought this kind of continued along here.
No, it just stops after that guiding principle.
Helen?
Thank you. Two comments. Thank you, Steve. I agree with you about the deliverables. And I also think that the code of conduct is important. It's all very well to talk about being respectful, but we, members of the board, sign a code of conduct. And we've asked everybody who is on a committee to do the same. And there are two reasons for that. And one is that it also says, yes, we're asking you to do this, and we trust you, and we want you to make a commitment to this association. So it elevates that I'm not just a volunteer stuffing envelopes, but that I have a real responsibility. So I think the code of conduct needs to stay in, and I do agree with the deliverables. My committee doesn't have a problem with either, by the way. Thank you.
So is there an action that needs to be taken on this, or are we just discussing the change in format?
Well, the committee voted to bring it to the board for approval unanimously. So we like this format. I think deliverables are in there. And we just felt like the code of conduct was really important for the board as the true legal board for the association, but that the committee members, it doesn't have to be that strong.
Doug? I think we need to move on. I think this is a lot of time spent on this one issue. What I would suggest we do is not try and approve it at this meeting, take it under further consideration in the governance committee. And some of the comments that have been raised by Helen and Steve Haynes, and then we'll revert back perhaps with some thoughts. I think.
Good idea.
Yeah.
I agree.
John?
I was just going to put in a plug for the code of conduct because the committee will bring recommendations to the board, and the board may well rely on the committee's recommendations. So there needs to be transparency.
So the plan is to table the discussion on the charter and move on.
Should they refer to the governance committee, Doug?
Yeah, I think that was the note.
Thank you.
We took it under our wing.
Thank you.
Good.
Debbie, Anything further on the communications committee?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, you want to go through with your report?
Thank you so very much.
Thanks, Sylvia.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Makes our job easier.
Following the agenda, the audit, I appreciate the work that Joe is doing as the interim accounting manager. And Joe, from my understanding, that's getting very close to completion.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you. Next is the bioswale. They're trying to organize a meeting for next week to get a more global understanding of the project. So that
To get focused on a scope of work, I think is and what was originally intended is the purpose of that meeting.
Mhm.
And then on the maintenance report, you've all had an opportunity to review that. The good news is that the sprinkler system is now working in Rex Park. That was a big undertaking, but that was done internally with staff. So I believe there was a fair cost savings by that. And does anyone have any questions on the maintenance plan? Steve?
I just want to request again that the Great Hillside 1 and 2 bioswales be identified as such. It's just going to be confusing for somebody looking back through them.
Okay. Bruce, could you note that we want to define which bioswale we're referring to either in phase 1 or phase 2?
You're muted, Bruce.
I'll take care of that with him.
Okay, is that better?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. The question, what's the difference between the two bioswales?
No, just that we identify which bioswale we're referring to in reports, either phase 1 or phase 2.
Phase 2.
Next is working meetings. That's been a conversation of, can committees have a working meeting as opposed to a formal meeting? So we did a quick request of Richard Davis, and that is in your packet. And so would governance want to consider that, Jeff, when they're looking at the charters to add that?
Yes, yeah, thank you.
Do you want to capitalize just what the bottom line was from Richard?
Basically, that yes, they're allowed, because it was as though can we or can't we, but it was, to get staff input, to have general discussions. They're not making decisions, so that you have that information and you're ready to go for the formal meeting. And Robert's rules of order and stuff, so much less formal. Okay. And then next, on the process of notification and rule changes, when we sent out the curb ramp policy to those that we had a couple challenges from the members about the process. And so in talking with Doug, what we're going to do is we're going to pull that back and do a notification, and then invite anyone that's interested in making any comment to do that under open forum at the next meeting.
That applies to all rule changes?
Yes,
going forward?
yes, it does.
So is that written somewhere?
Yes, and I'll reference that for you so you have the exact wording.
Ron.
So I think that the point is that we want to maybe make kind of a list of those before we do one at a time. Just a minute.
It was referenced in the initial discussion.
Under 11.01, it says copies of such rules and regulations and amendments thereto shall be furnished by the association to all owners prior to the effective date of such rules and regulations and amendments thereto.
Bill, you have a comment?
Yeah, I had a brief question. I would ask the governance committee to pursue this rather than a lengthy discussion now. But on the working meetings, I think we need to be careful not to have the working meetings too casual and undefined and unreported.
Yep.
seem that I'm not certain we should take away the quorum requirement, but at least we should consider that. And there ought to be some notes associated with it. There was an acknowledgement that they took place. If you're going to have a working meeting, you should at least report the results of saying at the next official meeting. So
I think the point of a working meeting is there are no results. For example, in any committee meeting, you don't record the conversations, you record the actions. Same with the board meeting. So a working meeting is background discussion that helps people formulate their own positions. They're independent of everybody else's positions and no action is taken. So I think with your suggestions, Phil, you're making it a committee meeting and not a working meeting.
And the other is that it might be a subgroup that meets to do the work without a quorum. So the quorum thing goes away on the other surface.
Well, I think that there's two things. We don't want to encumber trying to get stuff done. And the other thing is when we do come, we need to make sure that it's published correctly. And so I think that having working sessions allows us to, build opinion and so that when we come to either a committee meeting or a board meeting, we have the background so that we can then take action. I think that's basically what you were saying, John, right?
Right, without belaboring.
okay, your description of it sounds fine. I just worry about a shadow governance of the SRA.
I don't think that's going to happen.
Okay, I'm just expressing a concern.
Doug, can I just, I'm not sure if this is right. I just noticed we had a sign that was put in out here at the SRA. And I wasn't aware that we were going to have that sign. And part of this maintenance report was about the signage. So is that the type of signs that we're going to now have as part of our maintenance plan signage project?
That's been in the works for about a year and a half.
That's fine.
That sign. And the color is similar to the neighborhood signs. It does have the font of the logo of the SRA with the official logo. And the material is the aluminum, like we are switching out at neighborhoods.
Okay, and so we've already decided on that for the neighborhood signs. Oh,
No,
okay, because I would have thought that was all going to be the same, consistent across all of the signs. Anyway, maybe that's not the right time to talk about it, but it seems like we're putting up that sign, and that I would have thought that was going to be then what we use for all the signs, the same, metal posts and coloring and.
Good point. How is that sign?
That was approved by last year's board, and it's been in fabrication, and it had to go through the city approval because the PUD for sea smoke and allow signage. So you can see that the SRA Center sign is on top. There's a blank for what will go into the future development here on this tract.
Okay, so that was previously approved.
Yes.
And
More than a year ago, from what I could see on the billing.
Yes.
The only reason I raise it is because it was the first time I've heard it, and we've had discussions at past board meetings about whether we should use treated lumber or we should use pipe or blah, blah, blah. And it seems like we have already the answer to that sitting right there if we want to have consistency. Otherwise, we're going to have one sign at the SRA administration building and then something different in the communities, which would seem odd to me.
My understanding is that it was thought to be a decided issue before everything blew up. So some things were put in place and moving forward, and then that got interrupted. So we're just gonna have to deal with it.
No, but I'm just saying, I think we should use that as a point of departure. If we like it, then we should continue with it. If we don't, then we should stop. And, that's what I'm saying. It might be a good opportunity now since we're doing this 5-year plan.
definitely, when we talk about signs in our planning, we want to make sure that we start to get real consistent across the board. when we're doing that. So I don't know that the maintenance facility sign, because the maintenance facility building is out of context with the rest of the community, if it really makes a big difference. I mean, the sign probably is in context with the building. But, you know, it's what's done has been done. I don't know that it has to impact our discussion moving forward with other signs.
Okay, that's all.
Okay, Joe, you're done, Debbie? Thank you. Joe.
So on pages 15 to 19 is the 2021 update. I don't know if you've looked at it. I don't have the month of July on the first page, or I should say page 2 of the report. So page 16 of the board package, I believe, is July was a revenue billing month. So we recorded $400,000 approximately of dues that we're in the process of collecting right now. As most of you know, we bill in July, we collect mostly in August. The rest of the stuff, with the exception of the first line, which is personnel, is largely similar to what it was in the month of July. Personnel is because of a decision that was just made in the recent past. This doesn't need more said about it. In the annual budget, which is the next page, we are still very close to break even, not quite there. We moved a couple of personnel. John told me of a couple of personnel things on the maintenance side. We're not going to be hiring full-time people for the existing open spots in maintenance. That's for the rest of 21, correct?
That's the recommendation of the committee.
And so that's what I've put into the budget at this moment in time. We've got part-time plus the 1 full-time in addition to Bruce. So 2.5 people roughly until through the end of the year.
What page are you on?
I am on page 17. So this is the forecast for the entire year. I don't know if anyone has any questions on that. I know last month John asked me, it's a little bit different than last year, but in the last month, in June, we didn't have a revenue collecting month. In July, we did have a revenue collecting month.
The total repairs and maintenance budget seems to be the only one that's really kind of different than what the plan was.
So we removed some maintenance personnel, and I moved some money into the operating side to deal with the fact that we might have some contracted costs for maintenance over the next few months if we don't have the personnel in place. In addition to I think I put $30,000 related to costs associated with the 3 bioswales, the 2 Drayton Hillside ones, where we're going to have to do something on the operating side, I think, in addition to Carnoustie, whether it's legal costs, whether it's other types of things that we're going to incur. I've put them all under maintenance, under contracting right now for the year.
So is this an appropriate time to ask Bruce just to give us an update on the surprises, if any, on the 2 bioswales in Drayton Hillside?
To me, it seems like well, we can do that maybe in the maintenance
John, you have
discussion.
On your agenda. Maybe Bruce can address it then. Do it then.
Sure. This is just my representation based on information that I've received and or heard, and just put some stuff in. We're still almost at break even for the operating fund. On the next page, I believe, is the reserve budget. So what I did here, which is different from last month, is relatively significant. We're still spending less than we did in the plan, but we're spending more than we said we were going to last time, mainly because I've put in the risk of us funding significant amounts of money for the potential failure of the bioswale as a capital expense for Carnoustie, as well as Drayton Hillside. Now, I think I'm not going to talk anymore about the Carnoustie one. We know that theoretically they're responsible for it, but we know that practically we may be responsible for it. So I put in some amounts of money. If we're not, then this will be removed or it'll be substantially lowered. Drayton Hillside, both of them, the SRA is responsible for them. I have been told that they're in not great shape, and they may be close to the same amount of money in aggregate as what the Carnoustie is, but it's unknown at this time. So the $75,000 that I put in here in the reserve is a just in case number. It's an unknown. Once again, once we get a better feeling for it, hopefully that number will change, because those are numbers that were never part of any plans.
And I think it's important to note that the Carnoustie bioswale is still a question mark.
Correct.
It's not any SRA obligation. So,
Correct. It's just a question of whether the legal agreement, the legal agreement.
and we are
what the
pursuing that.
responsibility-
So
Yes.
that anybody listening,
Yep. Absolutely. And all I want to do is say, I know it's not our responsibility, but I'm putting it down here as a just in case.
okay,
And so what I did, so that was $150,000 extra. I removed a couple of things in the removed or lowered a couple of reserve costs that I had in here that are not priority items in the whole scheme of things, because I know it's not a good thing to be spending lots of money if we don't need to spend lots of money, as opposed to, like one of them was the Kubota tractor payments. We've got somewhere around $30,000 left in addition to the 15. We don't have to pay it off. I was recommending we pay it off, so we just ignore it. But that's just the reserve side. Any questions? That's just an unknown right now.
Okay.
And the last one is, as of July 31st, the assets and liabilities, which is page 19. The cash has stayed relatively the same. In August, it'll be substantially higher because hopefully we'll have collected about $400,000 in dues. But at the end of July, the dues, we had only collected a small amount of the dues from people who gave checks a little earlier than they were due. Any questions on any of the 2021 financials? Nope. Okay. So now what I've done, and on the next page, I'll move on to page 20, which is a very big highlight of this.
Joe?
Yes.
I guess what we need to do is.
Oh,
Doug,
Helen?
Should Joe not move acceptance of his report?
Just
before
what I'm
you-
gonna do.
Yeah.
So, is there a second?
I move to that the 2021 financials are for the record for the board.
Okay. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Thanks. All right.
Thank you, Ellen. Thank you, Doug.
Welcome.
So I'll move to just a topic of discussion. I don't believe this is going to be a motion. This is what I have related to the forecast for 2022 spending compared to 2021 spending, all in thousands of dollars by category. You can see that there's two main items of significance. Repairs and maintenance, and that $170,000 number, John, I think you probably recognize it from what you had for maintenance. Compared to this year, total repairs and maintenance after I threw in $30,000 for the bioswale stuff just in the most recent forecast is just over 100. And the other one is total professional fees, which is mainly comprised of Jake Lee and joint partners in 2021, which is not being replicated into 2022. All the other numbers are in the vicinity of the same. The reason why the SRA Center is going down is that's the cost of debt, which we're going to have a lower interest rate and we're paying down the mortgage, so it'll be a little bit less. So that goes towards the topic we were talking about earlier about the spending, but operational spending budget for 2022 compared to 2021. Steve?
Yeah, so has that been built up from the bottom?
Yes.
Requests for additional IT stuff?
There is IT support.
Those kind of things. Everybody's been asked what they need for next year.
So if you remember about, was it a month or two ago, Debbie did a presentation of what she thought would be necessary on the administration side. And then Bruce brought forward the maintenance side. And John and the maintenance committee have had discussions about that. Just a couple, was it on Saturday, John, or a couple days ago? You brought me with what you thought the final recommendations at this moment in time are for maintenance. So I took what Debbie had, Steve, about a month ago. I took what John gave me a couple days ago, and I represented this here.
So I guess my question would be, we've got a whole bunch of things out there, and I don't want to have a higher budget for 2022 to present than for 2021. But maybe an extra gate or something, you know, if we start looking at things like that, that bring it up to the same, roughly the same number, that would justify no increase.
Well, here's one big problem. I haven't put in the revenue here. If you look back a couple of pages onto page 20 or page 17, which is the forecast for this year, under other revenues is $55,000 of the PPP loan forgiveness that helps us attempt to balance the budget. That is not going to be there in 2022. So you can look at the 2021 number. If you drop that down, the SRA revenues are going to be slightly under $900,000 in total. And right now, Steve, AFC represents a significant number of, I think, 16, if I remember correctly, new builds at $3,000 a pop. I think we're representing about a dozen or so in 2022. So we're already in a negative position just at looking at 2022 after we dropped that 55 grand one-time loan forgiveness that was in the revenues. So I know what you're saying. We're already in, if I were to do an estimate for revenues, we would still need to get more because we're not going to get the same amount of revenue. But to your point, I understand exactly what you're saying. Right now, we'd be in if we kept the dues the same, right now it's about a 90-10 split. I think it's 91-9 between operations and reserve for the revenues coming in. We'd still be somewhere in the vicinity if we have AFC about the same at about 900 grand in revenue just under. So we'd still be in a bit of a deficit position for the ops fund at this moment in time. And I am not making an attempt to balance anything at this moment in time. I'm just putting out numbers that have been told to me.
So I think that this really gives us a nice, we asked for the roadmap, right? When Sylvia was here earlier, because if I'm not mistaken, we budgeted for 2021, not the forecast, the original budget for repair and maintenance was 64,000. And we're taking it to 170. So explaining that, which I think is all, it's gonna be a great story.
Sure.
Is gonna be really important.
Yeah, going from 64 in this year's plan to 114 in the current forecast,
right,
to 160 or 170 in the 2022 forecast is, you know, and it happens to be about 50 and 50 or 50 and 60, whatever, but it's very deliberate how the money is being spent with no wastage whatsoever. It's very focused. And so that is going to be a significant part, I believe, of the first town hall next week. So that's 2022. Does anyone have any other thoughts? Now, this is not something to bring forward. This is just a discussion item, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And then I think I've got two other items before I hit the next one. So after 2022, the next one, potential additional revenues and going forward. So what I looked at is I looked at the general ledger in 2019 and 2020. And what I saw was some money related to remodels in those 2 years that were credited to AFC. So I was wondering, is there an opportunity for remodels, or maybe are there no remodels happening here? Because I don't think we built out any remodels in 2021 that I'm aware of.
Yeah, we have.
Okay, I'm not aware of them.
But the fee structure could stand looking at remodels run from changing 2 windows to adding a story to your house.
Sure.
And they should be charged differently based on the size of the project. That isn't what's been happening. So that's.
I haven't seen anything in 2021. If it has happened, I haven't seen it reflected in the general ledger.
I think because none of them got done yet.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure about the process. I'm just looking at different ways.
One just finished.
Guys, I'm going to yield the chairmanship role or the president's role to Jeff for the next 10 minutes, 5 minutes, because I have a nature call. I don't want to hold up the meeting.
Okay. So that was just something I was saying regarding fees that I've seen in prior years. We're not talking tons, we're talking $250 here, $500 there, but they all add up. And then another one that I just found out is when we have lots that convert to homes, they convert at all times of the year. So one of the, I asked the question, why aren't there any partial term billings when a lot actually converts to a home? So let's just say right now, someone has a lot, and they just get a certificate of occupancy. They won't get billed for a home until the beginning of next year. Even though they have a CO today until the end of the year, they don't get billed for that home until next year. Now you may look and say, it's not very much money. Well, if we have 10 in a year, and it's about currently about $45 a month different between a lot and a home, multiplied by an average of 2 months or 3 months, we're talking, couple thousand dollars. It's just a billing thing. All it is we took CO on this date, you owe us an extra $45 a month prorated. Should we be thinking about that? And I know that this may not come up in the board, but it isn't happening, and I don't know why it's not happening. It's not very much, but I think it should be from whenever a CO happens, certificate of occupancy happens. I would, John.
I was going to raise a counterpoint and piggyback on Steve's prior comment that we ought to be trying to get more money into the reserve fund. I'd like to propose the idea that we start billing vacant lots at a full home cost. So instead of 2 units for a vacant property, make it 4 units. And if there's 100 or so of those existing at the moment, that would be about a $45,000 bump into the reserve fund every year, which would be diminishing over time, but have it dedicated to a cause like that.
So we chatted about that a couple of weeks ago, and at the finance committee, we brought it up. And what we decided to do, what I wanted to do was bring it here and ask that specific question, because that would be a CC&R type of issue. And I wanted to bring it forward to the AGM for people to consider it, maybe vote on it, maybe. And it was thought at our finance committee meeting last week that we want to look at all types of revenue in our community and deal with an entire bulk because I wanted to phase it in the future anyways, give them notice. But the thought was at the finance committee that maybe we wait until next year for the AGM or if there's an opportunity to do it at a different time than the AGM, do it then. Because there's other types of revenues, for instance, just a couple that I mentioned, that we don't seem to be getting, that seem to be what we should be able to do. And that's one of the reasons, or that's one of the things I think we're missing out. Lots are one. Debbie, do you know when the CC&Rs came out with lots being half of a house in the whole scheme of things? Was that at the beginning of time, 30-something years ago?
It was the beginning of time.
So we were an entirely lot-oriented community, and that would allow people to buy. Now we're an entirely house set of community with, I think we've got 750 homes or condos, and we've got approximately 112 or 110 lots. We're an entirely different community, and lots take up a significant amount of time as compared to regular lots. So just a thought. I'm not bringing this forward for anything other than food for thought, but it will come up to a vote at some point in time in the future.
I was just going to say, I think this is a very interesting, some of these concepts you raised, but in the interest of the time for the meeting here, I think what I would recommend is the finance committee bring some proposals to the board, concrete, here's the reason why we propose this, and this is what we will.
We will. I just thought I'd let you know because
I'm just saying, so we can move on to the next, because we have other committee reports and other agenda items.
I got one more, which is HOA collections. Some of you may or may not have known that even though you guys in this room thought that your bank account would be debited with the second half of dues, it has not been yet. Some have not. There were some issues with the file that was uploaded to CIT Bank. Some of them are still trying to be resolved. So they should have happened all on the 9th. It's now the 19th. Some of them have not. Hopefully it'll be figured out in very soon. From what I can see, according to the records of the approximately 400,000 that we were billing, 67,000, 58,000 in current dues is still to be collected, which is, you know, somewhere close to 15%. Today, technically is the day that people are late. I'm saying technically, where there's technically a $250 fine allowed to be allocated to people. I have, according to my records, about 120 that have not been recorded as received. I'm one of them.
Non-EFTs?
Pardon me?
Non-EFT?
In total, just total. Of the EFTs, of that 120, I have, from what I'm seeing in the GL today, about 45 of them, or maybe 50, were going to be EFTs that have not been collected yet. It's a timing issue. We are not going to go fining anybody, whether it's due. And this is something that's in the charter or the rules. We're not going to do anything until we'll look at it again in September. Of course, it's not going to be high priority, but it'll just be something to bring forward.
Does a note need to go out to folks that are slow?
So for the current dues, not even thinking about it. I have in my records, I have 7 that were in the first half of unpaid and 2 from prior to the first half. There's been a recommendation made that we contact them individually and tell them if they don't pay within a week, they will be fined for those dues.
Well, I was thinking more along the heads up to the folks who were slow in getting the draft out of the account so that they know what's going on and why it hasn't.
So that's sitting, Lori is aware, and Lori's trying to actually pull it. Some of it may be coming on a day-to-day basis. We don't know. They just didn't read the file right. I don't know why.
Let's see in the next few days if we get, because if you go out with an email, then people are going to call. And,
yeah,
what's going on?
Not interested in the month of August. Maybe in the month of September, we'll see if we need to follow up with some.
The last 51 are pending right now.
So at about 50, yeah. That was just FYI. So now, so that's it for the treasurer's report. Now on to Finance Committee. So on page 25, there's a couple of a few minor changes, 21 to 25, I think. Sorry, and to the Finance Committee charter. One of the things says. We have to have a minimum of 5 committee members. Well, we don't have 5 committee members. We have 4. So there's 4 as the minimum and up to 7. And in the membership, it says the executive director or general manager and the accounting manager. We've stripped all the accounting manager because we don't have an accounting manager, and I don't anticipate that we are going to have an accounting manager here. We're going to have a bookkeeper. So references to the accounting manager are out. What's happened in other committees, we were the first committee to go to fruition. It was 72 hours advance notice. I've seen others have 48. So we want to do 48 hours rather than 72. And I don't think there's much else. Oh, one of the responsibilities, there were 3 main areas. There's actually 4 listed. So I thought I'd change it and include the term of financial planning. And that's about it. So the changes are all in here. What I'd like to ask or propose is that these changes get changed right now. And I know that there's going to be other changes coming up when we go to a 1-page format or something, a more concise one, but we didn't have enough time to deal with that kind of stuff at the Finance Committee.
Motion to accept the changes. John, move. Second. Steve, Thank you. Any further discussion about it? Okay, all in favor?
Aye. Thank you. Then the next two apply to the board, and these are going to be recommended as resolutions going to the annual general meeting. So the ones on page 26 and 27, you should pay attention to because they're going forward to the AGM. It's going to be a question of whether the board supports it or supports these or don't support them. So the first one is regarding unbudgeted expenditures. So in essence, what it says is that if in the budget there are items that during the year the board decides to spend anything in excess of $20,000, it needs to be just noted through regular communications by the communications committee that the board has approved to spend on this particular item and it costs between $20,000 and $40,000. It's just notification that the board has decided to spend this amount of money. Anything that is greater than $40,000 needs to go to a vote.
And that's a unbudgeted.
Unbudgeted, yes, items that are not budgeted. As an example, we can go back a year ago and say the joint partner stuff, that would go to a vote as an example of people. Now, this isn't an AGM vote, but we are very aware that the vote would be done through election runner. Is that the way we do the online election stuff? And we're very aware that it'll be in conjunction with Washington state law, where it would have to be 50% plus one of the people to say no to that item of all units, which is going to be very difficult to achieve because their social media didn't even work last year to get that amount. But this is just one that the board is going to be transparent. This is all about transparency. The finance committee believes, and I'm on that, that the board needs to be much more transparent if we're just deciding to spend bundles of money going forward.
Principal agreed to, how were the numbers determined?
That's my question.
How were they arrived at?
Yeah, 20 and 40.
20,000 seemed to be amount. So the 40,000, I initially said 50 and they moved me to 40. I was looking at about 5% of the budget, of the total budget for the year. And I actually said, how about we just do 5% and of the annual spending budget for the year from the operating side. They decided they wanted it to be $40,000. And we actually talked about a couple of specific incidents. One of them last year, very dear to my heart, was the fact that the board decided to spend $35,000 to create the budget that went to the AGM. $35,000 for the budget that went to the AGM. Nobody knew anything about it except the people sitting in this room. So we talked, how about something less than that amount to go to a vote? And it was decided, no, that's too little. So they decided that something that needs to be noted, but it can be voted on for higher amounts.
So the other question is, so we conceive of an emergency situation in which this would tie the hands of the board in a way that is unacceptable. So tsunami takes out the Spit and Boundary Ridge in the winter when half of the people are in Arizona and the communications are down. It's impossible to get a quorum. It's impossible to do an online meeting, and you got to do something. So do we need some kind of very unlikely emergency exception in here so that the board could act in a timely fashion in some kind of horrible disaster?
That makes a lot of sense. And what we're looking at is a solution that makes sense that the board, we would prefer that the board buys into and brings forward anything that goes to the AGM. So if there's a discussion that we want to have on it to add some lines about what a force majeure or whatever they call it, I don't know, maybe that's the wrong terminology or something like that. But those types of things, that would be fine. Now, I don't know how we, or I'll just say we, because it might happen this winter. I don't know how we just say, well, let's just spend $200,000 on, stuff down at Boundary Ridge or wherever. I don't know how we say that that's okay or not okay. I'm not positive.
So in terms of the hierarchy from a governance perspective, if we vote on this and we say, okay, we have some rebuilding of trust to take care of, the community has spoken on this issue. I mean, this has been out there, finance committees looked at it. So we as the board, maybe with some additional language, can get behind this. I wouldn't want to bind future boards, but I think if it goes to the next level, so this is voted on by the entire membership, doesn't that would then bind future boards?
It would go, the reason why it would want to be brought to the AGM for people to vote on is so that it would be in something like the CCNRs, it would be buried, so that a board just couldn't undo it. Just decide, no, we don't like this, we're going to throw it out.
So your answer to the question is it would tie the hands of future boards.
Not our action.
So keep in mind
The
one
membership.
Yeah, so is there, if we say, and I'm not trying to, I'm not trying to trick anybody, right? But I'm trying to not tie the hands of future boards, understanding that this board, we have some trust building to do, right? Because of prior actions, right? So I can get behind this board saying, let's do this. But I'm thinking for future boards, right? Then it feels like we almost have a shadow board of directors overseeing the board of directors.
Who's the, I don't understand.
Just have the community regularly putting together.
So keep in mind, there doesn't have to be a quorum of a number of people voting on a budget issue for the state of Washington. More than 50% of the people who vote. So let's just say we just decide we're going to go spend 50 grand on something. Could be a person. We're going to hire a new person that's not in a budget, and it's going to be 50 grand for the year. So we would put that out and say, this is what we believe we need to hire a person for the year. It goes out on election runner question mark or questionnaire, say, do you support this? 50% plus one of all units represented in our community must vote against it in order for it to fail. It's almost guaranteed of going forward. But what we're doing is we're actually we're being transparent, saying we're putting this in. We know, we the residents know it's probably going to go ahead if the board believes it, but we're giving them an opportunity to vote on it. So to your point, it might take a little bit of time to get the questionnaire out, but it can happen. A questionnaire can happen next week.
There's a 15-day notice.
Okay, 2 weeks.
requirement, and then the whole voting process.
So, but what it's basically doing is making the board plan.
Helen's.
Hi, thank you. A couple of points. I agree with Steve Haynes. I mean, in principle, I think this makes a lot of sense. Thank you, Joe, for pointing out that a vote on any budget item is the 50% plus one of all eligible accessible units to defeat it, not just those who vote. But I think that what we should do, because the situation that Steve Haynes raised is critical, I think that the board should send this to governance with a request that the governance committee check with council and also check with other HOAs through the CAI. How do they handle this? This is not the only association who's faced with this or ever faced with a crisis. So I think it requires a little more due diligence to make sure we've got it all correct. And I think legal review and what other associations, how they've handled it, would be part of that. And so it should go to governance to come back to September's meeting, because if you want it in the AGM packet, it's got to be done by then. Those are my thoughts. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I think we could get stuck on this issue in this meeting for too much time. And it's an interesting concept, but I also have concerns about precedent setting and tying hands for future boards. Also about how we get these 20 and 40,000 figures So I think we need to have more discussion that we can really just focus on these resolutions rather than trying to do it in this
And the
meeting.
board needs to develop a position that the board is supportive of. And I think that there needs to be some good discussion on it. So why doesn't governance take it and we can pull in opinion and stuff.
I mean, transparency goes without question, Joe. We all agreed. And to Steve's point, the guy says this is our primary responsibility, or one of ours, to build that trust. But we have
So
to
we
make
threw
sure
in
that
20 and 40. If you guys think different numbers are appropriate.
seems
like
small to me, but
30%.
anyway, I would take it under, and then you can have John. I would agree to take it under governance, and we can have that discussion and bring in, whoever.
I just want to say there's been good discussion. I think Steve raised an excellent point. And in principle, I strongly support this. And I think, as I read it, the intent is to tie the hands of future boards. That's the point, because it does us no good to build trust in 2021 and 2022 and 2023, only to have it be lost in some future board actions. But I think it's really critical that we get some proper wording in here that deals with force majeure, some emergency, whether, and I haven't lived here long enough to know if the city of Blaine ever declares an emergency or some other triggering event that would define or some other wording of what defines an emergency. We ought to be able to do it, whether it's, expenditures to imminently protect future imminent damage to property or life. We should have that in there, and we should go forward with this.
Sure, we welcome whatever language it takes, but it's important that it comes through on the next board meeting, because
Jeff, would you like to make a motion that this goes to governance to kind of start to build the case to bring back to the board at the next board meeting?
So moved.
Second.
Thank you, John. Is there any further discussion on this? All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, it's unanimous.
The next one, the only person in the room who was part of this last year is Bill. And it's the exact same vote that was brought forward at last year's AGM regarding debt. And it's being brought forward again, that there be no new debt being able to be added by the board without the residents knowing about it in advance of it going on the books. So the discussion we had, and to refresh everyone's mind at the last AGM, it needed 2/3, I believe, of people who voted in order to pass. And I believe it got literally 66.5% or something. It was like a few units short of passing or failing or whatever. It went in the direction of the board. So what this is doing is bringing forward, or hopefully for the board's support, that there will be no more new debt brought forward without a vote by the residents. And I believe that this undergoes the same set of voting, et cetera, et cetera. So the discussion we had, so currently in place is a mortgage and a $100,000 line of credit. The $100,000 line of credit is not drawn on and has never been drawn. So the one thing I've mentioned to the board in the past couple of meetings is we replace the term mortgage with the new bank and get a percentage different or lower, and then get a new line of credit, which has a smaller interest rate over the 15-year term. I asked the finance committee, what do you think about if I put that in place for the community, would that be considered getting new debt? Their answer was no. It's if you draw on that line of credit, that would be considered getting new debt. But it is smart to have that line of credit in place in case of an emergency, whatever it might happen. Drawing on it is a different thing. But getting it in place is smart business.
Joe, was there any discussion on a minimum amount or, you know, because technically if we were to write a check and we don't have funds in that specific account, right, for that day, and the bank covers it, that's debt.
So I can answer this way. At the end of any given month, towards the end, before the billing cycle, we have somewhere around $800,000 or $900,000 in the bank between reserve and op fund. There is absolutely no reason. And now that we've moved to CIT Bank and only CIT Bank, we still got our peripheral account that we're still waiting to close. There is absolutely no reason whatsoever there should be more debt brought forward. So I know what you're saying.
I'm really using it, that's a technicality.
So
we say,
there
okay,
is no,
over $5,000.
so in the past, that could happen because we had 4 banks, I think, and we had 15 accounts, and all of them where money was going back and forth to each one, and that could happen, and that would be debt. There is no reason why that should happen going forward.
Doug,
I don't have much trouble with the 806, but you've slipped in the revision of another section of CCNR's 501 down at the bottom. And I had several questions about that one.
Okay.
One, it's unclear down at the bottom where it says prior written consent of the association. It's unclear since you're talking about both neighborhood associations and the SRA, which association you're talking about, who gets to vote on it. So that would have to be clarified. What happens if you do this? What happens to the existing obligations in the 28 CCNRs, the SRA and the 27, that assign responsibility to the SRA from the NHOA? Are those grandfathered? It doesn't say that in here. Are there any existing obligations that are not in the CCNRs that we've agreed to, written or informal arrangements between the SRA and neighborhood associations? And if we did all that, how would we assure that the maintenance and repair that's assigned to the neighborhood associations meets minimum SRA standards and follows the SRA CCNRs? I mean, I just think this is very complicated to do because the NHOA problem is such a mess. And that we're going to have to work on that to get to this kind of change.
I'm not sure how to respond to your questions about the NHOAs. I don't think that the SRA should be covering any debts or expenses or obligations of NHOAs. I don't know if I'm saying that correctly, but I don't think that this is entirely the SRA and nothing to do with NHOAs, right? So NHOAs can go into debt.
It's specifically about all the other kinds of organizations that are under the master SRA. Multifamily areas, neighborhood areas, commercial areas.
So if there's wording that needs to change, then it should change. Last year, very similar information went out to the population and it almost passed. And if the community was aware of it prior to it, I guarantee it would have passed.
thank you. I think that the points that Steve has raised are absolutely critical. And yes, that almost did pass. I think it was 4 votes. But the fact that people did not understand the complexity, they weren't part of this discussion, for example, is underscored by this discussion and how terribly important it is to make sure we've got everything perfectly correct. So I suggest, once again, this go to governance with checking with council and looking into all the details, because Steve has just raised some really critical things. Both Steves have, actually. And so it needs to go over to governance to take a look at it and then come back to the next meeting. The intent, I understand, but we can't, and it binds the future, but we can't just do the intent. We've got to make, we've got the details. So that's my suggestion, Jeff. You're never going to get a night off between now and the 16th of September.
We're gonna be meeting every other day. until-
So I wish you had done something in here, Joe, like you did on the Finance Committee charter that shows what the exact changes are. Can you speak to the 501? What are the changes per se? Where did you get that?
I did it.
Okay. That's about what I thought.
The problem is we have no handle on the complex relationships between the SRA and the NHOAs that are written into 27 different sets of CCNRs in addition to the overall ones. I just think we're setting ourselves up for a lot of conflict.
So is there a motion to push this over to governance and work through
Yeah, it's okay. We'll have to look at it in governance anyway.
is there a motion? No?
I'll make the motion, yeah. So second.
Thank you. Steve second. Any further discussion? Okay, all in favor?
Bye. And then I think, do I have one more thing or is that it for me?
That-
I don't need to get more for governance.
I am
Thanks
done.
a lot. Good. There you go.
Steve.
I have, we sent out all the background information in advance. I have a few short things to report on, and then we do have a proposal for premise. Contrary to our previous discussion, we've abandoned CCNR changes from the ASC. And we have made major revisions for the purposes of clarification and better communication in the standards, residential construction, multifamily construction, and landscaping. We will be bringing those forward. We have to make some adjustments because it was built thinking there would be CCNR changes, but it actually isn't that big a problem. And our plan is to have a public comment period, to put out the red line and the new one up on the web. We'll probably have a little survey along with it. That'll be a chance for the board, for everybody to review and give feedback, and then bring it forward to the board. This requires board approval, it's not a change in the CCNRs. It doesn't require a vote at the AGM. We had some concerns about information we saw from the communications committee, but I think we can let that pass based on the discussion we had. We are currently having dyspepsia in the communications between the NHOAs and the ASC over who approves what, when, and what overrides it. So we've had things go both ways. We've had things approved and done by an NHOA that we didn't hear anything about. And our people will drive around and see something happening and we don't know anything about it. So that it takes time. It takes Christina time to check on that and see if it was approved and that's what. And we've had one the other way that we approved. They were submitted separately to the NHOA and to us without any intercommunication, and we approved it and they did turn it down. So it's a mess. It's not a bad mess, but we were planning to bring together representatives from the organized NHOAs just to talk about a temporary plan of communication while we wait for the governance committee to work this out next year in more detail. It's just unclear who approves what. So we're going to do that.
Joe?
Steve, in the past, has it been all the ASC or has it been partial name or has it just been hodgepodge in the past?
You know, as far as it's crazy. I mean,
Oh, so it's just sort of random.
everybody
Or
does what they want, and sometimes you have a collision. So
you're trying to formalize it.
we can improve it. We do now have guidelines for undeveloped lots, and that the environmental committee is going to be watching over. So our intent, after getting the standards done, is to develop guidelines for developed lots. We have had complaints, and concerns expressed. There are no written guidelines. There is something in the CCNRs that gives the ASC the authority to set the rules, but as far as I can tell, hasn't been done. So that's our intermediate, that's on our intermediate list. We are also, we got a request from a developer to send out a survey about his proposed development and do his market research for him. We thought we probably should do that. But we are going to set up an early design and planning meeting with him so that he officially gets the official feedback of the organization on what the overall design and look and feel and should
If you
be.
do that, is it within a neighborhood association?
Yeah. Well, no, it doesn't have an association yet.
Okay, so it's separate.
It's a separate plot. And we'll probably try to get Carnoustie people if they just move forward. And then finally, it's the big issue is the Carnoustie buffer situation. And as I said, that we sent out the background information, and it's a very sticky problem. And after our fact finding, we came to the proposal of 3 things that we think are the best solution we can come up with. And that is, 1, the structures and landscaping in place in Carnoustie are there. They were approved by the ASC and they need to be accepted. We're not going to make people crank their houses up and move them 3 feet to solve problems. 2, we do have the authority in the CCNRs of Carnoustie to allow restoration of the natural vegetation buffer. That's the one that wasn't supposed to be touched. But dead and dangerous trees can come out and invasive underbrush can be cleared. So we have some ability to do that. The problem is that restoration, much of which is at the request of the St. Edmunds Green lot owners, has to be done on the property of the Carnoustie owners.
Yeah.
So they have to agree. And so our proposal is that we encourage anybody who feels the need to restore the buffer. And it could be from either side. It's a privacy issue. And you can see St. Edmunds Green from the Carnoustie side, and you can see Carnoustie from the St. Edmunds side. That we and offer mediation services through the ASC. Some people don't want to talk to each other, but we can walk back and forth. And the plans would have to be approved by the ASC because that's within the CCNRs. They have to be approved by the ASC in order to be done. And see if we can get to agreement. And if they can, there really isn't a route for them other than to sue each other. But it shouldn't involve the SRA. And then the third is just to reinforce that both buffers are under control of the CCNRs of Carnoustie and the SRA. And the Carnoustie CCNR says the ASC needs to approve any changes that happen in the enhanced buffer, the inner buffer next to the houses, so that we would remind people that they can maintain what's there because that's been approved. But if they want to change it, it has to go to the ASC, even though it doesn't meet the 30 or 25% of your lot criterion that is the normal threshold for having to get approved. So that's what the resolution says, is that we would adopt those plans for trying to achieve some degree of peace in the semi-demilitarized zone between these two.
Is there a motion
So I would move approval of the resolution presented by the ASC.
And is there a second? Jane, thank you, Jane. Is there any discussion? John?
Steve, for the encroachments by homeowners basically extending their yard into the enhanced natural forested buffer, were those approved by the
Yes.
ASC?
Those plans were approved by the ASC back then.
Against the,
Mhm.
Well, no, in the enhanced natural forest buffer, you can make changes if approved by the ASC. That's what the CCNR
The
says.
20-foot, that one is the inside.
yeah, I understand where it is. I'm just the definition says it will remain vegetated with existing natural vegetation that may be enhanced with indigenous trees and evergreen plants to create a natural and forested appearance with the approval of the SRA. And planting grass doesn't comply with that, nor does mulch.
We agree with you, but the ASC did it, the board approved it, and the city signed off on it. So all of the authorities that have control over it at that time signed off and said, it's okay. And undoing that would cause Joe to go out of a tailspin because the legal costs would go way up. And it's unfortunate.
So
Ellen?
I just wanted, when I read this packet, I wanted to pick up the phone and call Steve and say, thank you for putting this down so succinct and so clearly. It's the first time I've understood the whole thing because you've laid it out so clearly, and it is a lesson in how to move forward and how important it is to be so diligent about, again, details and knowing all the CCNRs and abiding by them. So thank you for doing this detailed work that enables the board now to make some decisions. Thank you very much.
So Steve, I have a couple of friends who live on the Canvasback side, and they've asked me just general questions because I'm on the board. Well, can we do anything about those? Because they're not supposed to be there. So I said, I don't know. I'm the finance guy. That's not my issue. If they were to ask me again, because this is just over beer or whatever, do I just say it's over and done with?
What's not supposed to be where?
The buffer area is being built into, the houses are right against the area. They've got property that's in the buffered area, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know that he wants to do anything, but he's pissed off about the whole process that occurred. And he's been there over 20 years.
So the inner buffer is allowed to be disturbed with SRA approval through the ASC. That was done.
Yeah.
The houses on the plans that were approved, the edge of the house goes right to the line. Whether they're over the line or not, I mean, we'd have to survey it again and all that.
Yeah, I'm not worried about that.
And you're not going to fix that. So that situation, I just don't see any alternative to accepting it, since all the authorities agreed that it was okay.
Oh, no, that's not the question. It's and more, I guess more the question is, why weren't we, as the owners on the other side of that buffer zone, asked about what was going to happen before they just decided to drive right into the buffer
Well,
area?
the assumption, I mean, I don't know, I wasn't there, but I'm assuming that the assumption was that the developer would not disturb the 20 feet of native vegetation buffer that was not supposed to be touched. And he did. And contrary to the statements that have been made that nothing was done about that, he was confronted with that and did plant additional trees back into that buffer. Probably not enough, maybe not in the right places, but he did do something. And he declared that he had done what he was required.
Okay, and that's just, I'm just trying to answer the questions that they're saying.
I would direct the questions to Steve rather than trying to answer them yourself. And that way, at least you get
Okay.
better information.
I'm over to
So Steve, in your opinion, if this request for the same level of encroachment on the enhanceable area came to the ASC today, would you recommend approval?
I think not.
So the point I'd like to make is that it's not really clear in here in the resolution that anyone's really acknowledging that the ASC messed up and that this is the get out of jail free card for a one-time situation. And I think that I would like to move to amend this resolution to state that if this were about to happen today, we would not allow it. But since it did under a prior ASC who we believe messed up, we're going to let it pass.
I would say that this resolution is very specific just to this situation. There's no way that this is translatable to any other situation. I just don't know where you put a statement like,
Well,
everybody screwed up.
like the second paragraph, whereas there has been acknowledged disruption of some parts. That the
John, why do you think that that's necessary to go in there?
a lot of people have the opinion that it's always easier to get forgiveness than permission. And with some of the board's prior actions with a token fine for people who have gone ahead and done things without prior approval, we're kind of setting it up that people would be better off just doing their stuff and then coming back and hoping the board will.
I agree. We have been put in that position by previous actions. I agree completely with that. But I don't see a way. I don't see that blaming them now puts us in a stronger position. It can be used as an explanation for why we are now enforcing the rules more definitively.
I got an earful from a person on the St. Andrews side of the buffer the other day down at the bioswale. And he swore that back as early as 2016, he was going to the ASC over and over and over again saying, this builder's going to mess up. I know they're going to do it. You guys have to stop them. And they didn't.
Was this Don? He's been the voice.
Slight build guy.
He's been the voice. We've got all of this stuff. He's right. We've told him he's right.
So,
but there's when all of the authorities in charge at that time allowed this to happen and allowed for the resolution that was done to be called satisfactory, our hands
I get that.
and we are emphasizing in the third thing that you can't do anything in there without getting ASC approval first.
So is it the consensus that we need to amend the document?
As proposed?
I put forth a motion to amend it to basically add some wording that the prior ASC messed up and the current ASC would not have allowed.
There a second to that motion?
Be seconded or die.
I'll second that motion.
Okay, I'm going to call a question on the vote on the amendment. All in favor of that amendment? All opposed? Okay, I think it stands as written. There's a question on the floor. Any further discussion on that document?
Well, the only other discussion is, I take it that we still don't have an active NHOA. So now we're dealing with a buffer issue, a bioswale issue. At what point do we put our foot down and say, get your NOH, because we're doing all the work?
I think once we know what the real cost of the bioswale is going to be, that will be the trigger to do that.
Dick and I've had some discussion on the governance committee about trying to start to put some feelers and some discussions out with that group to see where leadership is and possibly get something pulled together.
I just go back to comments I've made before. It's totally unfair to those organizations, NHOAs, who are organized, who do meet regularly, who do take care of their issues in-house. Because the ones who are not organized are basically just outsourcing all of those activities. Not in this case, I get there's some ASC has to be involved, but in general, they're just saying, well, geez, if we don't have to do it, Debbie and the team and everyone at the SRA will take care of all of our issues.
Okay, I'm gonna ask the question so that we can move on. All in favor of the, what do you want to call it? The resolution to move forward with the document.
Resolution regarding Carnegie buffers.
Yeah. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Passes. Joe and John. Okay.
Just for the record, who made the motion to adopt the resolution? You did, and second was, who second?
I think it was Steve. Yeah.
Okay, you said, thank you, Steve.
Wait, Debbie, which Steve?
Steve Haynes moved in with Steve Geisel seconding.
Thank you.
Comment.
Elections Committee, Helen.
You have the minutes of the July meeting. We met in August. We're proceeding along our timeline and everything is in order. And we look forward to getting the budget and any other items for the annual general meeting packet in time.
Thank you very much. I love the brevity.
Oh, boy, that was good.
That was a breath of fresh air. We did the communications, Jane, safety and security.
Nothing to report.
Great.
Jeff. Okay, good. So the governance committee met. Actually, the issue we just discussed was one of the key discussion points. It is a very complicated issue. It does go to what Steve Geisel says about the fact that we don't have an incorporated NHOA. Both of these issues are really front and center in their CCNRs. So Doug and I know some of the residents that live in Carnoustie. We'll try and have an informal discussion to try and just see where people are at on that. And I don't know if Peggy is on the phone, but we did have a nice discussion with Peggy Richter, and she, of course, was a very good asset. With good information, very helpful information, enlightening us on this very difficult issue. So we thank Peggy for that input. The other issues that were on the agenda were the chair of the elections committee, which at this point is a non-voting director.
Non-voting member.
Non-voting member, excuse me.
Not a correct.
Excuse me, thank you. Non-voting member of the board. And so you see in your packet that we have discussed this, and we are proposing that the language be changed. And going forward, the elections chair will just be a member, a community member, a volunteer member, but will not have the status of a non-voting member of the board. Which means it will not be participating in executive sessions and so on. So, so you see the language there. It was simply.
Where is it?
It's on. page 48. And so we just proposed to strike the sentence fragment that has to do with the non-voting status, non-voting member status. Other language is pretty much as it was in the charter. So that's what we're bringing forward for the board.
And I think the other piece of background was it's important to keep elections committee completely independent of the board.
So normally all the committees have board members as chairs, but because of the conflict of interest, we suggest to just keep it as a committee member, just as a resident status.
So there were two resolutions brought forward, right, by April's group. Do these changes satisfy what those resolutions say?
I think that the resolution, if I read it right, is like the previous two that we discussed, that they want to take that to the AGM for an amendment to the CCNRs, correct, Joe?
That's my understanding. I'm not familiar with the other two. I was just on the finance ones.
Yeah, as I read it, it was similar. I think what we should do with that as well, refer it to the governance committee for position development for the board's position.
Are you looking for approval on this today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, on this one, definitely.
Yeah, this is separate.
Well, I would think in the future, well, in the near future, is to also take the two resolutions into the governance, assuming we pass this today, like also look to see if there's consistency there with the language that we're changing.
Just by way of background on this a little bit further, Richard Davis said there is absolutely no prohibition for having the elections committee as a member of the board.
Right.
He said that's done in many associations across the state. Two other attorneys, one that April's hired, and then Peggy weighed in and felt that the state law was clear. And so I think from the governance committee's perspective, this wasn't something that was worth an argument or a fight over or anything other than let's just handle it, get it done with, so it's not an issue. Alan, you have any thoughts?
My thoughts are that the next chair, because I'm going to be resigning shortly, anyway, my term will be up, isn't going to have to spend as much time as I have. I never expected to be on the board. It has been a hell of a lot of work, and nominating committee chairs often are on the board in various organizations. So I'm easy, whichever way you guys want to do it.
Yeah, I think the big question that is left is how do we bring the election committee in sync with certain things throughout the year that the board needs to deal with. And I think that we're just going to have to work with that. Steve?
Well, I mean, you can invite the chair of the committee to come and report and get feedback from the board, like Sylvia is doing communications, as often as we want, as we need to.
Okay.
So that was the thinking, treat it that way. So, so do we want to make a motion to adopt this resolution regarding the revision to the current charter as regards membership?
Is there a second? Joe?
Yeah.
Perfect. That was Jeff's motion, Joe's second. Any further discussion? I'll ask the question. All in favor? Aye. And any opposition? Okay.
Okay, just two other quick, just for the sake of clarity, we also discussed the the Carnoustie buffer issue that Steve just elaborated, and just general changes to CCNRs as it relates ASC, as Steve mentioned at the very beginning. And we want to steer clear of any revisions, formal revisions to the CCNRs at this time. And that was really the subject, the 4 subjects for our meeting last Friday.
Thank you, Jeff. John.
Thank you. As you probably know, Jennifer has resigned from the maintenance committee, and I would like to nominate Charles Fordyce, to join the maintenance committee. So that's a motion.
Okay, is there a second? Second. Okay, Bill, thank you. Any discussion? All in favor? No opposition. Perfect.
Further, I don't know how much information people want about the recommendation of the maintenance committee regarding the budget. And I'm willing to give you the broad brush in a couple of minutes, if that's what people would like to have.
Anybody want to delve more into the maintenance recommendations? We feel like we've seen them and read them, and in the course of the next few days will be discussed.
How about, John, if you briefly go through, because I didn't specifically talk about any of the items that you're suggesting for the reserve budget for next year.
Okay. So reserve spending, the committee has recommended that we follow Bruce's plan to replace 4 gate operators and safety fencing. As the first year of the 5-year plan, that's about $23,000. The committee has recommended that we move more aggressively than the 5-year plan on replacing entrance signs with treated wood posts and the new metal signs. There are 10 locations where Bruce has evaluated the posts to be in extremely poor condition. And the committee believes that the best estimate of full replacement of those signs is about $7,600 each. So if we move ahead and do 10 of those, that will be about $76,000. Additionally, move forward with putting vinyl floor covering in the maintenance stairs and office area to protect the unnecessary wear and tear on the wet boots and stuff up there. And also Bruce has recommended or requested that we build a small storage facility built with pile blocks and a little metal roof and some tarp sides for the parking lot, so that we're not storing sand and salt in the building, which is detrimental to the concrete floor and everything like that.
So external.
It'll sit outside to keep the sand from getting wet and frozen. So it's accessible when we need it. And that's a relatively small amount, about $6,600. Those are the significant things. It's about $115,500, which is a little bit more than the estimated intake from the contribution to the reserve fund. So we'd be drawing it down somewhat, but the signs especially are an eyesore in many locations, and I think it would be money well spent to accelerate the worst of those in the coming year.
John, do you know if there, or Debbie might know this better, is there any restriction on an out house or an out parcel house on this lot, or are we allowed to by virtue of sea smoke and whatever we've got?
It's probably a quick look at the PUD just to make sure that we're in compliance.
Is there anything that needs to be city approved?
We have no idea. It's just Bruce asked for it and gave his reasons, and Seems like that would.
I know within the gates, I don't think we're allowed to have those little houses that are off from the.
This isn't really a house, it's
It's
a,
a shed, but we're not allowed to have sheds within the gates, but it might be completely different here. Anyways, I don't want to debate it.
it's those concrete bollards that will form a little U shape. Put sand in and some metal legs and a metal roof on it, with some tarp sides.
Well, no, I'm totally fine with it. I just don't know if we need to do anything with external parties.
It's a good question, I don't know.
Thank you, John. Anything else on the maintenance committee report?
No,
By the way, I just want to say good work to you and the committee and working closely with Bruce to get where we've gotten to. I know that was a lot of work, so. All right. Environmental committee.
Okay, there's one item here. We'd like to have the board approve the appointment of 2 new members, to the environmental committee. Currently, we have Jennifer and myself. The 2 new proposed members are Stan Monks and Wendy Kunst Massey. And they've already started participating in the activities.
You want to make a motion?
Enthusiastic. I make the motion.
Is there a second? Steve Geisel's. Any discussion on these 2 nominations? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Great.
And another brief report,
Okay.
given the time of day or night.
Mhm.
All right, we met on August 1st at my house and had quorum satisfied, and we also had our candidate Stan Monks attend. And we covered, just give you the highlights. Covered the purpose of the committee, which is, and how we were going to move forward on that, which is the monitoring of the NDL plots. And the charter specifically addresses NDL plots, and then it gives us the opportunity to look for other things to consider for the environmental nature. So we suggested a system of registering the landscaping companies that operate inside the SRA community. And we'll address in detail another time why. This didn't get distributed on the board packet. Perhaps I didn't meet the deadline, but I'll distribute it amongst the board members. There's a lot of details in here, so we'll address them now. But it's related to future ability to regulate their use of pesticides and the type of machinery that they use, with the intent toward moving toward quieter landscaping equipment. We discussed rules regarding the use of herbicides and pesticides inside the SRA community. That is going to be a long-term project we're initiating. We suggested we generate an environmental survey to put forth to the community. Stan has a proposal for a memorial tree program, which has come up in the past. And Jennifer has been sending out environmental committee tips published. And that's the.
Are you going to then create standards, environmental standards? Is that the
goal?
Okay.
Specifically relating to pesticides.
Yeah.
Yeah, please.
Okay, I would just make one comment to that. I would think that when we do that, we should have some of the landscape folks come to the meeting and address us so that they can respond to and we can understand what kind of impacts those things have
That is
on
our
them.
intention.
Great. Steve?
We want to do something similar for builders
Yeah.
and subcontractors.
Hey, you've scheduled the next meeting for September 8th in the SRA office. And, all day. Pardon me?
That's town hall day.
I know, and we recognize that and are likely to have a short Zoom meeting. We weren't able to do it on the first, and we were getting enough conflicts that we thought we'd simply have a short Zoom meeting just to review progress and then adjourn so that people can participate. So we recognize that issue.
Anything further?
No.
Oh, great. Okay, Debbie, do you want to give us the continuing Jacob story here?
There's a meeting scheduled with Jacob here at the SRA Center on Monday, the 23rd at 9 o'clock. He has a clear understanding he is to be here in person and to bring the new website and the mapping project to those participants. We have Jane, John, and Doug participating at this point. And that we need to get this finalized so that the committees can utilize this tool.
Absolutely. Okay. There you go about the town hall, right? So next step is executive session. And so we'll just retain the board members and Lori, make sure that we turn off the recording.
Okay,
During the executive session.
I will go ahead and move everybody to